Welcome to another long-awaited Lone Trader motorcycle review. We're going to be reviewing this 1995 XV535 Virago motorcycle. But before we do that, let's cover a couple of things. The first is just this channel in general and hoping you guys might wish to support it. I do these reviews because of my love for motorcycles and my enthusiasm for older bikes and wanting to share them with you guys. But this is in no means a profitable or even a cost-neutral exercise. So if you like the reviews you see or any of the videos, you'll find in the description and the pinned comments a link to buymeacoffee.com and my page there. So if you want to support or tip what I'm doing at all, then please click the link and feel free to submit a tip. It'll be much appreciated and it will help me to continue to do these videos. So, having said that, gotten that out of the way, I'd just like to say, before we start the review, if you want to skip to any of the sections that we talk about, these are structured reviews, just go into the description and look at the timestamps and then you can navigate to any of the parts. So we have, what is the bike? What does it feel like to ride? What are the highlights? What are the lowlights? What does it cost to buy one? And how does it fare in the market? And then finally, my conclusion about the bike. So just go to the description and navigate to any of those parts of the video if you wish. So, everything out of the way, let's start the review. So what have we got here? We have a 1995 XV535 Virago, as we said. So what is a Virago? It is a Japanese cruiser, and it was one of Yamaha's attempts to sort of take a poke into the Harley crowd, and it came at a time when America was basically trying to fight the horde of Japanese imports coming in, so they put a tax on any imported bike over 700cc. So you got your big Harleys, and then you had like a raft of low capacity or mid-range capacity Japanese bikes. One of those was this Virago here. The Virago series started, I believe, in the early to mid 80s, and I believe it started with the 1100, and then there was a 750, and then 535, 400, various capacities. I think this is probably one of the more popular ones out of the range, and you still see a lot of 535s and 400s around in the UK, and I believe in the US as well. I'm not sure about other countries. So let's talk about the features, and we might be able to explore what makes it so popular. So, it's a standard cruiser motorcycle, looking a bit like a mini Harley. And we have here a single overhead cam, 70-degree V-twin engine. It's 4-stroke, it's putting out about 38 bhp at the wheel, or somewhere about that, 44 bhp at the crank. It's being fed by 2 carburetors here. We're looking at a shaft drive delivery, so, you know, it's a proper kind of Tory cruiser style sort of thing, even though we'll cover that later. We're being stopped by a single disc dual piston caliper at the front here and a rear drum brake. We've got an electric start, we've got a 5-speed gearbox. We're also looking at a cable clutch. So there's not really much of note to make this bike stand out technologically. It's just a little V-twin standard Japanese motorcycle. There weren't many changes throughout the production run, which was from about 1987 to 2004, depending on the region. In fact, it was produced alongside its replacement, the XVS650 Dragstar, for a good few years, which is an indication of how popular this was. There weren't many changes throughout the production run. I believe some of the earlier ones had a more standard reserve switch. This one's electronic. The earlier ones also had a single under-seat petrol tank. Later ones had a additional header tank up here. On the originals, it was dummy. At some point in the run, there was an upgraded gearbox. I don't know exactly when that is, but yeah, we can cover how this particular gearbox feels a bit later. So now you have a bit of an idea of what it is we're riding. Let's start riding, and then I'll explain how it feels to ride. So, first things first, it's a nice little V-twin, so it feels fairly authentic. It's relaxed to ride, pretty unimposing, perhaps unremarkable, but it is quite pleasant. The engine delivers its power in a limited way. It's not powerful, so for a 500cc engine it's fairly understressed, but what power it does have, it delivers in quite a linear and nice smooth way. So you've got quite a lot of torque throughout the rev range. Handling is light. Control inputs through the bars don't require much effort. The lightweight helps it to feel quite nimble, but because the weight distribution is quite low, it doesn't feel flighty and it doesn't feel like it's going to tip over. It feels pretty well balanced. Gear changes through the gearbox are, again, unremarkable. They feel good. Ground clearances, alright. And because of the limited power of the engine, in dry weather and the nimble handling, you never feel like you're about to break traction or you're going to get into trouble. You can apply any amount of throttle in most situations, and the shaft drive keeps it nice and smooth. And because it's not a performance bike, any slight delay or laziness in applying power and it coming to bear doesn't really matter, so the shaft drive is well suited for this. I don't think I've ever caught any false neutrals on this box or anything, so it's all good. In terms of equipment and riding and using what equipment there is, well, there's very little to speak of, so it's not a really a long conversation. You don't have a rev counter, but because it's such a linear engine, and because you can feel when you're sort of reaching the soft end of the power, it tails off after a while. It's not really a problem, and you're never in too low or too high gear. Kind of feels more like, what do you want it to sound like? Do you want to sound like you're in high revs, or do you want to lug it in low revs? It all feels pretty good. Control inputs are light, throttle is nice and light, clutch is nice and light. The brakes are, you know what, considering it's a single disc, quite good. See, there's quite a lot of power there actually. The feel through the front doesn't require much in terms of strength of application, and you can reach the power that the brakes have quite quickly because it's not really a sporty bike. I've really never felt the need to test it to the point of getting to braking traction on the front or anything, and I don't really ride this in the rain for reasons I'll cover later. But emergency stops are certainly possible, and I've never felt like I'm running out of brake power for the kind of riding that I'm doing. The rear brake, you wouldn't really use much in terms of, apart from gentle application during corners or during slow control. It's a drum brake, so feel isn't amazing, but for a drum brake it's pretty good and quite controllable. The riding position itself, it's actually quite comfortable. The seat is very supportive. The seating position is very natural. Your feet are forward, but they're not right up in the wind like you would get with like a much more extreme or image-based Harley or Japanese cruiser or alternative. And the controls in terms of position of the bars, the position of the bars is good in terms of height and width, so they're not too high, not too wide, not too narrow. It feels cruisery but still feels quite natural. But one issue I have with these bars, and I'm not sure if all bars are the same throughout the entire run, is that the angle is a little bit sort of 45 degrees on, and it doesn't feel immediately comfortable. It feels a little bit awkward at first. And it can get a little bit wearing on much longer journeys. But for shorter journeys, it's good. The headlight is clear enough. Indicators are nice and large. Now we've covered a little bit of just the initial riding impressions and what it's like to poodle around on. Let's sort of cover the highlights of this bike. What do I like about it? So first off, this is a very characterful and charismatic bike. It's more than the sum of its parts. It's a genuine V-twin, and it's got good feel, and if you get the right parts, it can sound the ticket as well. So this has a Jadis intake kit with a carb kit, and it's got Black Widow exhausts on it. So I'm genuinely getting a little mini Harley soundtrack whilst I poodle around here. And in terms of handling, like I mentioned before, it's quite light. And because it's quite light, and the position of the pegs isn't too extreme, you can actually lean it a bit further than you might expect you would. You're never particularly worrying that you're going to ground out the pegs. And you can get to grounding out the pegs and it won't be upset. Not that I particularly ever want to do that whilst riding this. It's quite a nice carefree experience to poodle around on as well. Because of the power delivery, you can basically full throttle it everywhere if you're feeling like it. And you can make very good, relaxed, gentle progress. In terms of commuting, it's fantastic. In fact, slipping through traffic becomes something small, unimposing, fast but not too fast. It feels great. And I get to my destination probably a little bit quicker than I would on other machines, because I'm not concentrating on controlling the bike, I'm concentrating on my journey in the traffic, filtering, finding gaps, that kind of thing. In terms of reliability, these are good machines. There's very, very few serious faults to ever really find on them. They remain reliable, and they also remain fairly numerous as well. In terms of maintenance, everything is very easily accessible and visible. In fact, you can get to the carbs without taking them off the bike, both sides. And that is actually more helpful than it sounds it might be. And as we'll discover later, it's probably quite necessary as well. It's an economical machine. You'll probably get above 50 UK miles per gallon or thereabouts. So you're not going to be spending much because of the power. You're not going to be spending much on rear tyres or front tyres. There's no chain maintenance. Brakes don't cost much. You've only got one set of pads to replace. I really do think this is a more characterful and interesting choice of commuting bike than a lot of other options. There are various nice options for it that help to sort of extend the capability. I've got the sissy bar and luggage rack on the back here, so that just makes it a nice bike to sort of shove your waterproofs or your backpack on and get to and from work. And for Sunday rides, it's fantastic, although people might laugh at you a little bit just for having such a tiny little bike, especially if you're going out with the cruiser type people. They'll have engines 3 or 4 times the size of yours, and that could be quite comical. But you'll be keeping up with them, and you'll be having just as good a time. Now we've gone through the highlights, let's go through some lowlights. And there are a few for this. So one of these is that you got all this lovely chrome, and it's everywhere, frankly. It's all over the place. And it can be a bit of a nightmare to keep on top of. You've really got to keep this thing clean and keep it well protected to stop it from going rusty. And there are a lot of them out there that are pitted and rusted to hell. And it'll be very rare to find even a good one that doesn't have a little bit of rust on it. But you can keep on top of that. Another low light is that despite the overall reliability being very good, I keep seeing on the forums, and in fact I've experienced this myself, it's very common to have some running issues, and it's usually related to the carbs. In fact, this one I had to keep on top of and do some work myself to get it running right. So at the top of the rev range and at full throttle I was losing power. So my top speed was probably limited to about 70, which, you know, is doable, but I didn't have the full throttle ability at high RPMs. I'm not sure exactly what I did properly to fix it, because I did multiple things at once, which is kind of wrong for fault finding. But I replaced the main jets, I reset the carb diaphragms, and I reset the floats to make sure I was getting enough fuel. I also replaced the spark plugs. Now it's running nice and sweet. I can full throttle it up to about 95-100 miles an hour with no issue. It takes a while to get there, but it can do it. And because of those running issues, you get a lot of people replace these this dual carb setup with they'll buy a manifold and then install a single carb. Although you do hear reports of them being a little bit hard to set up in terms of you lose some fuel consumption, and as a result some tank range, which is the next thing to speak about. So although it is economical and you won't spend much on fuel because the miles per gallon quite good, the fuel range is pretty poor. You'll get to 100 miles maybe before you get to reserve tank, and on the earlier models without this header tank, I'm assuming that's just even more diabolical, probably something like 70 miles or whatever. I'd imagine you'd probably get to maybe 120, 130 on the reserve tank as well. So you end up stopping for fuel more than you might like. And then let's move on to, a lot of them have this electronic reserve switch, and with these bikes being the age they are, you know, a lot of them getting on for like 30 years old, or 25 years old like this one. You can never quite trust that the servo that moves the fuel tap is actually going to work. So when I'm getting to 100 miles on this bike, I tend to just stop and get fuel, because I don't trust that reserve switch is actually going to do what it needs to do. So those are the basic small reliability and maintenance niggles out of the way. The next lowlight I've got to cover is the gearbox and the gearing in general. So this is a little cruiser bike, obviously, so where it's happiest is sitting about 50-55 miles per hour, and if you go up to, say, the national speed limit in the UK for dual carriageways and motorways, or freeways as you Americans might say, that's about 70 miles per hour, and I think this was made for the 55 mile per hour cruising market. But if you get above that speed, you're up into the high rev ranges, and it gets pretty vibey at the bars in an annoying fashion too. And that's where you're in fifth gear. So this is sort of crying out for a sixth gear or some slightly taller gearing. And of course, being a shaft drive, you cannot alter that gearing in any easy or useful way. So that means that this bike is good for commuting and pottering around if you keep on top of the maintenance. But touring, I don't think it's necessarily the bike for that, because if you're doing long distances, you're either going to have to go very slowly, or you're going to have to put up with a lot of annoying vibes. And the final lowlight I've got to cover is this bike is just god awful for pillion. It's a light bike, it's a small bike, and the space on the rear seat is not great, and once you get pillion on, what little power it does have, which is adequate for one person, really is not adequate for more than one person. So if you want to use this bike to go anywhere with a spouse or to give people lifts, I would definitely suggest something else. So having covered all that, I think you can agree that none of these lowlights to me really feel like game breakers. It's generally a charming and characterful bike, and the niggles are small. So having covered what it's like, what I don't like, let's talk about what it's like to find and to buy one of these. So on the market they are numerous, but they do come in a range of conditions, and because of that there is quite a wide range of prices you can pay. Year is not really something you need to pay attention to. It's all about condition, mileage, maintenance, that kind of thing. Now the main issue is if you're looking at the lower end of price ranges, which is about 1,200, 1,500 quid, then what you're going to be looking at is probably mechanically quite good condition machines, but they will be rusty, pitted, they will look like absolute dogs, and they won't be very nice to to look at, and there will be quite a lot of effort to restore to any semblance of looking good. Now, if you go up to the top end of the range, which I wouldn't really suggest, which is about 2.5, people might ask for higher stuff like, you know, 3 grand, 3.5 grand. Then you'll get probably a very well maintained and nice looking bike. You can shoot for around 2k, 1800k for like a really nice, well sorted, well kept one. If you look for the right stuff and you're patient and you negotiate well. When you're actually buying, there's not really much that you need to look out for in terms of stuff that's going to be kicking your ass when it comes to the owning experience. You probably just want to make sure that you're not going to run into those running issues if you can. So make sure you do a test drive, make sure you run it through the rev range, get it up to speed, and that it's not sort of crapping out on the power or stuttering. In terms of other bikes you can buy that are a bit like this, it's kind of in a class of its own, I guess. There are definitely competitors, but none look quite as pretty, and a lot of them don't really have the same charisma. Some of them have different engine types. Parallel twins or a single are quite common. So I guess the closest you could say would be the Honda Rebel 500. And it's probably going to be a little bit cheaper, but it's going to look a little bit more boring, probably ride a little bit more boring. It hasn't got quite that same sort of feel about it. Getting more quirky, you've got the Kawasaki Eliminators, but really that's sort of like a mini muscle bike, the 650s and 400s. That's a inline 4 across the frame. So it'll be faster, but it won't sound right, and it's not going to be the same experience. Whilst we're riding by, let's just take a nice quick look at the Aus Valley Viaduct. Look at that, friggin' tastic. I guess if you want to look at what this was competing against, you've got some of the smaller sort of Sportster, smaller capacity sort of 800 Harleys and stuff, but they're going to be much more expensive. The riding experience is going to be less carefree, and probably end up getting less power. You'll pay a lot more, but you will get the kudos. Then you've got the 650 Dragstar, what replaced this, but funnily enough, it's a heavier bike, it's got less power, doesn't look as good, and it's probably slightly more expensive as well. And it doesn't carry the same kudos as the Virago. In the Virago range, you got the 750, looks a little bit more awkward in my opinion. You don't get much more power for it, it's bigger. You got the 400, which was a Japanese market one. It's like functionally identical, I think, just a smaller engine because they had different rules regarding capacity. And then you got the 250 and the 125. The 125, I believe, is a single cylinder. The 250 is actually still a good bike. You'll get up to 85 miles an hour on that. Still a V-twin, I think. Looks largely similar, although I think it has a false second exhaust. I think it just goes 2 into 1, but it tries to remain having the appearance of a 2 into 2 like this bike. So yeah, and you'll be paying similar prices for all of those bikes really, so they kind of reach their value. I don't think that this bike is going to significantly change in value. It's sort of a classic, but I don't think that the price is going to skyrocket at any time. They're too numerous, and they're not quite desirable enough. No one had pictures of these on their bedroom wall when they were younger. It's just that they're a fun experience, and I think people that buy them like to keep them, and people that have ridden them find themselves interested in them. So it's a fairly safe bet when you buy. You're not going to really hit many issues, and you're not going to lose money on it. So I guess it's time to come to a conclusion on this thing. What this is, to me, is a fantastic buy. I've been using it as a commuter for about 1.5 years now, and it does that job admirably. I have fun doing it. It always brings a smile to my face. I wouldn't consider using this for long touring rides. It would be too annoying and or too slow. But if I'm going to the shops, I'm going to take a bike, I'll leap on this straight away. And I like maintaining it. I like looking at it. I think the the looks have maintained their relevance throughout the years. It just looks sort of right. You picture a little cruiser motorcycle and this just comes into my mind. None of the proportions are wrong or out. If you're looking for a summer riding bike and you just want to have fun, you really can't go wrong buying one of these, and I say nice it. It's fantastic. There you go, that's my review of the Yamaha Virago. I hope you enjoyed it very much. If you did, please like and subscribe, and do consider looking at the description and or pinned comment in this video to tip me for my efforts and buy me a coffee. Apart from that, I'll say sayonara until next time. Now, how the hell do I get home? I sort of know where I am, but I've gotten myself slightly lost. Oh, fuck me. That exhaust is hot. Shit. Oh.